Hello, everybody. So, Mr. Ravjeen, that was a great talk because I'm kind of doing a small piece of what you were talking about. And let's see if we start with my presentation. Do I get a clicker to change as well on the screen? Clicker, clicker. Aha. Because then I can show my fun pictures. Thank you very much. Let's see if I get this going. All right, so the goal here is to talk about artificial intelligence and some of how it got built, where it came from, and then we're gonna just try and run through very quickly what's called vibing when you're programming, and I'll show you that. Generally, my slides, some of them have a lot of text. I'm not going to repeat all that text. It's for reference in case you look at this in the future, but I will give you a summary, what I'm talking about there. One of the things was your dream. So when I was a kid growing up in my city, my dream was that my football team would win a championship, which they did. So I got one dream. And the other was to be an astronaut. And I started doing that. And I got partway and then realized, I don't think I'm serious enough about this. So now I do computers. And I think that's been a wonderful result of that. And a very, very interesting career indeed. So we'll talk a bit about me and the group that I come from. We're going to talk about neural networks and how they led to some of these large language models that we are now looking at. Large language models are the basis on which things like ChatGPT and all of the other AI solutions that you see out there are built. Some of the history between OpenAI and ChatGPT. Then we'll do some vibe coding, and we'll look at a real example of doing what's called vibe coding. So sort of my background very quickly, I've worked for a few companies, I've helped out with some, helping some charities basically, and then currently I work for a group called the Network Startup Resource Center. We are based on the West Coast of the United States, so we are part of the interesting changes that are taking place worldwide. We're stuck in the middle of it where I come from. And this is a bit of the history of our group over time. Started up in the 90s. We moved from MIT, which is a technical university in Boston on the East Coast of the United States, over to the West Coast, which is the University of Oregon. And then starting in 1996, our government started giving us money to build research and education networks across the globe to improve science. And amazingly, we've been allowed to do that. And we've been able to stay non-political in what we do, and we're nonprofit, which are two things that I really enjoy. So this is where we are from and I'm from. There's my football team winning a game down there. It snows. We have sort of a mid-sized city, and Donald Duck is our mascot, which is one of the great things that we get at our university. This is my group's core statement about what we do and some of the reasons we're here. There's several of us who work for our group are at this event and have taught a couple of the workshops. And so really and truly the goal is just to keep on building collaboration among peers, all of you, so that all of you meet each other, you learn about technology, and hope you can help push it forward in a way that helps society. That's our goal. And we'd rather people be friends than not. It can be hard sometimes in the world that we're in. We're spread all over the globe. A number of the people who are the dots on here are sitting in the room now. And that changes from time to time. There's about 40 of us globally who work on what we do. So I'll stop talking about myself and my group, and now we'll jump into this concept of where did this OpenAI, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, large language models all come from? So we started out really in the 40s and 50s with the first actual sort of technical look at neural networks, meaning how the human brain works. Can we translate that into something that you do on a computer? And we moved along from there, and we kind of had the same way of doing things for quite a long time, just more computational power and things that were sort of artificially intelligent. They got better and better, but only up to a certain level. And one of the things that's not discussed very much is if you can create something that works about 98% or 99% correctly, it's not good enough, okay? The problem is 1% error rate is devastating when you are trying to do anything on a large scale. Very quick example, they tried to do identification of potential terrorists and criminals at a Super Bowl using artificial intelligence, and they incorrectly identified 10 people out of 100,000, all of who had nothing to do with what they were looking for, but they were all arrested and taken into questioning, and they realized we can't have any error in this type of technology. So what the heck is a large language model? We'll talk about that. And then how has OpenAI taken the concept and pushed it forward? And now many, many groups are doing the same thing. So first we start with our neural networks, and we create essentially a structure in memory that simulates a bit how neurons work in your brains, and they have relationships between themselves that you build over time by training a neural network. And you do that by giving it information. It attempts to put the information in a way that's correct. You tell it you're wrong, this is the correct way. It tries again, you tell it it's wrong, this is the correct way, and you do this over and over until eventually it gets decent. This is what artificial intelligence was doing. It was also using something called machine learning as well. Put the two together, and you got a lot of the solutions that we used up until about the last few years. Here's a long quote about what we're actually doing here in terms of a computational neural networks, right? Interconnected nodes, artificial neurons, they process this information in layers. They come up essentially with a database in memory so that when you ask it very specific questions, it gives you specific answers that may or may not be correct. It got pretty good. Some of this stuff got good. Things like listening to you speak and then writing into a document are all based on this old school of neural networks and machine learning. And they got to the point of it being about 99 to almost 99.9% effective. So this is just some of the way these neural networks look in terms of drawing out how you interconnect the dots. I just thought that was a pretty image, and you can go read all about it on the links that I include if you want to go into detail. This is something that was done all the way back in the 1980s in a company called DEC that was purchased by Hewlett-Packard. They created a box that could speak out loud, and it was called DEC Talk, and it was aimed largely at people who had problems speaking themselves. And you could write it text, and then it would take it back to you. An early project I did in the early 1990s was to teach DEC Talk how to actually pronounce entire book like the Three Musketeers, which has lots of French mixed into English, how to get it to pronounce it correctly. We got pretty good. We did this with a neural network, but we were lucky because I worked at a university where I had access to our mainframe computer, and I was able to run the training over Christmas for 2 solid weeks so we could get 1 page of the Three Musketeers to come out of this box sounding reasonable. But it was a pretty fun project. So what happened in 2007 is that a group of 8 Google engineers got together and they wrote a paper, and it's called Attention is All You Need, right? And what they did is this paper came up with some absolutely seminal or original ideas about how should we be training these neural networks, which we're actually going to now build a little differently, and how should we get them to receive a lot of information and then be able to give back answers to questions in a better format than what we've been doing. So the paper introduced 2 core ideas, an architecture known as the transformer, and it's based on something called the attention mechanism, right? And when you put these 2 pieces of information together, these are formulas for how you actually take data, feed it into a large database in memory, and then you actually go through that and you change the way you pay attention to the information coming in. And you do it in many different ways. One of the ways is when you send information in, you can now do it in parallel on multiple locations all at once, so you can train something much more quickly. 2, you don't just take what appears to be a basic relationship, but you start breaking things down into individual words and how they interconnect with other sets of individual words in different sentences, and from that you build something that gives you better and better responses. So the transformer, which came from the paper, it's a neural network. It processes a sequence of data like a sentence, and it focuses on the most important parts of the input instead of the entire input. Determining what the most important parts are is a little bit tricky. And then it, instead of processing everything word by word, right, it can look at it at once, and it makes it faster to train. The attention mechanism is a way for the neural networks to focus on the most relevant parts of data that are sent into it. And this was introduced in what we call the transfer model. So this was the key. Google came up with a way to approach how to build neural networks into a different format. And this is where we got the idea of what are called large language models, which is what we are using for most of our artificial intelligence solutions that now exist. So what happened next? A company called OpenAI looked at this paper and said, oh, wow, that's a big deal. And they were the first ones to do it. That's why they get a lot of press. Everybody else in the industry is now playing catch up, and they're catching up very quickly, right? So people argue all the time, what is the best AI interface to do something? Largely depends on what you're doing, who's put it together, how they've built it, and people are now building these large language models in slightly different ways. Originally, OpenAI made all of the ways they built their large language models public, so you could copy it yourself. This was on purpose to try to avoid having AI technology be owned by one single government, right? That was the goal at the start, to get this out to the world so everybody can do this. It was successful that way. Naturally, it has now landed in the hands of very large corporations and in the hands of some governments, right? But it's a bit more mixed and global at this point. So OpenAI was the early adapter of this, and they built their first generative pre-trained transformer. That's what GPT stands for, a generative pre-trained transformer. They built it in 2008. And that was GPT-1. You did not have access to it as the public. You could see how it was built and try to build your own at that point in time. So there were different versions. We got version 1 and 2. 1 was the first one. Can this work? Can we make it work at all? The response was yes, this does work. At which point, around 2019, OpenAI started to get some large amounts of cash to try to build this bigger and faster. So the first GPT version that came out publicly, about $1 billion was spent on creating it, right? And so GPT version 3, it took a couple of years. And one of the big things was this was the first one where billions and billions of parameters were provided to it. And it gave, as this is marketing, by the way, I don't write like this, showcased unprecedented. That's how you know marketing is involved with the statement there. Oh, by the way, a lot of this was created using AI, okay? So a lot of the images and some of the design and me grabbing quotes like that all came out of me using various AI tools to do this. So anyhow, it did allow you to respond to people's questions in a way that had never been done before. People were now able to begin to ask questions in a much more natural language method rather than being very specific, and they got responses that actually made sense. So GPT-3 was, ooh, we are getting close, right? Then they had a thing called Instruct GPT. This is where they let some of the public in, and they allowed them to actually start feeding information to this building process. Not everybody, just some got into here. And it was fine-tuning to make it look better. Up to this point, access to this really wasn't all that pretty. It was very basic, it was text-based, right? You sort of just wrote things out and then it would respond to you. But then, ta-da, in March of 2022, out came version 3.5, and that's what you could get to publicly. So at this point, about $1 billion, again, has been spent building this. That's a big breakthrough because they put an interface onto ChatGPT, which many of you are probably used to, where you can speak to it and then it responds. And it responds with a voice. And if you've used Apple products with Siri, You're like, huh, that voice sounds suspiciously similar, right? It's on purpose. It's a pretty good product. So the models were improved, all this kind of stuff happened, but this was the moment where OpenAI started to get serious funding, and the next few models are built on $10 billion of investment, okay? And they're using way, way more compute power to build them, and they're getting better and better. So here comes the ones that we've seen over, it's amazing, it's only been 2 years, okay? So GPT version 4 came out in 2023. That was considered a big deal. Many of you may sit on your phones and use this right now, or you use somebody else's, or you use Microsoft products who all use OpenAI in the background. Okay, Microsoft's AI stuff, it's all OpenAI. If you ask why, there were $10 billion invested. They invested a huge amount of that money. They actually attempted to own OpenAI at one point, at which all 700 employees walked out and said, no, that's not happening. So they had to back off. And that is why OpenAI still is a company to itself. Many people can argue they don't like what it's doing, but it's its own company so far. Things have been moving along, and then we got these nice new versions of GPT, and they became more friendly, and they did things, and they had all these models, and these models would do things like respond differently to certain types of queries, right? And some would run faster, and some would run slower, and then we got version 5, which is what we have now. So with about $10 billion of work, we've been able to get to version 5 of the large language model that OpenAI uses. Okay, so you can get into it for free, all right? So if any of you have been using ChatGPT, this is what you get for free, right? You sign in, you gotta give them information. You gotta tell them who you are. Oh, wait, they actually use that information to help build their model more. So your information will get sucked in by them and they'll use it. It's stuck in the Copilot too, okay? So if you're using Windows 11 or above, you have ChatGPT built into it by default. You can turn it on or off, and there's lots of ways to do that. So for free, there's some limitations. You can only ask so many questions, right? There's a fallback model. When you ask questions or it gets really busy, it gives you a lesser level of response. And peak hours, when it's really busy, which is kind of random because what time zone are you in? What is a peak hour? Where is it doing this? Do any of you have children who use ChatGPT for their homework or any of the other AI models? My daughter uses it all the time, constantly. We pay for it because she needs to have non-stop access, right? The first thing I got when I did not pay for it was a plea for my daughter because she had hit her limit for the day and could not finish a project, right? So we've had to sit down and explain how I would like her to use this versus cheating, because the teachers in the United States, and I'm assuming everywhere else, are dealing with this now. Is this an actual piece of work by the student, or did they just get it from somewhere, right? Okay, some tips and tricks. If you're gonna use ChatGPT, these are nice little tips and tricks. If you click on the ChatGPT icon, you get 3 different models that it might use. The auto one is where it goes, I think I have a really good answer to that question and I do not need to do a lot of work to get it to you. So it comes back pretty quickly. The instant one means whatever I got, I'm giving it to you. I'm not gonna dig any deeper. You get what I have. The thinking one is the big one. A lot of people aren't aware this is even built in, and you really only get it if you pay for it. That's where it will go out and actually do further research on your question, including opening large databases of papers, documents, and publications that it will not look at normally and try to find better answers for you. I've played with all of them. It is true, if you give it the thinking model, you may get a significantly different result. It can take a long time. Instead of seconds, it will be minutes. You also can do new sessions. I don't know if you follow this or not. I'm guessing some of you do. When you run ChatGPT, if you don't tell it I'm in a new session, it remembers what you asked previously, and that might actually confuse it to give you an answer now. So if you want it to be a fresh start, you say new session, okay? And you do that by clicking on the little button up here. Temporary chat just means I'm not going to save your information, supposedly. It's going to be quick, and we're just going to run it, and when you're done asking the question, it goes away. I don't keep this as something I've done. Legacy models, there's a huge amount of discussion about it, and because I want to show you doing some vibing, I will jump through the legacy models kind of quickly. The bottom line is they're very specific, the older models. So I talked about what all those were. I already gave you all the details on it, and this is for your reference if you don't remember what I said. The legacy models have specialized performance for certain things. So versions 03 or GPT-04, they're for specific types of output. Workflow consistency is their marketing way of saying the results you get will be the same as you're used to. Whereas if you use the 5 model, I'm going to respond to you differently. So if you've programmed something into it, you may need to update your code before you can use the latest model. Turns out these models have value. Only certain people can use them, and they're going to go away, access to them. Nobody's quite sure when they'll go away, but whenever it is easiest for OpenAI to remove them from the general public, they will no longer be an option for you. And they've done this consistently across their models. So the older models, like I said, stability. Enterprise and educational users are likely to get access to them for a longer period of time. If you pay money, you'll get it for a while. And then I love their transition period. This means while it's still economically viable, we will provide you this model. Until we start losing money on it, it goes away, okay? That's the transition period, right? So OpenAI so right here I'm just saying this is how OpenAI has approached the world. And what it's attempting to build is something that gives you a very large capability and trying to get a big tooling ecosystem, meaning you'll have APIs, you can do all sorts of stuff to it, you can run it differently. Google, Microsoft, XAI, sovereign AI trends, look at these things a little bit differently. So these are some of the differences. Deep science research from Google. What else do you think Google has that nobody else has in this business? I'm assuming there's a lot of Gmail users here. They have all your Gmail databases, all of it, all of it, all of it, all of it. If you open Gmail, you agree to allow them to look at what you're doing. So they also have all your searches on Google if you do it, and they save all of it and they help build their AI models. They have an advantage, right? So OpenAI does not have access to your Gmail information, right? So they won't get that, so it'll be different. Strangely enough, Google might give you a much more specific result depending on the question you ask for. Like if you ask about your aunt or your uncle, who knows? Maybe they'll respond about it. All right, so let's move on to vibing because I have enough time to go through it, which is kind of cool. How many people who here have done vibe coding? Raise a hand if you have vibe coded. It's a lovely bit of terminology, huh? It's an odd English word. A vibe is a way of feeling something about something, okay? I have a good vibe about this, means I feel good about what's going to happen. All right, maybe I'll back that up really quick. Yeah, look at the presentation. I used vibe coding a little bit by making it better and better, by doing it over and over again. I actually asked Microsoft, which is using OpenAI to do this in the background, right? It's using ChatGPT. I would say, hey, could you show me some ways to make this page look? You're probably noticing my pages are changing the way they look. That's on purpose. If I do the same thing every single slide, people tend to get bored or even more bored than you might be right now, right? If you always see the text the same way. So I would ask and say, can you, let's have a look. And then I would add some more stuff and I'd say, can you show that to me again? And I'd be like, ooh, that's prettier. I'll use that one. I just vibed officially, according to the way this is defined. So I used a whole bunch of tools to try to build this presentation, and they all failed, every single one of them, okay? So then I wrote my sister, who is an expert in this. She does this for her job. And I said, how do I get one of these tools to actually create a nice presentation? And she said, oh yeah, no, you have to do a lot of work before it'll do it right. And she told me all the steps and how to do it. And I did a little. I was like, oh yeah, that is better, but I don't want to do that. I want to do the old-fashioned way, and I'll just put it in PowerPoint and have it make it prettier. But Beautiful.ai, very popular these days if you want to create presentations. There's many others. Now, when you want to vibe, meaning you want to take code and you want to be able to have it get created for you very quickly, then you want to look at how that code looks, and you want to be able to talk. If you want to do it talking, you can write and ask for the tool to actually clean the code up or change it or do something different. There are so many different vibe coding systems out there. It's a stunning number. The big ones, Claude.ai, that's what I used. It's run by Anthropic. Anthropic is a company in San Francisco from ex-engineers from OpenAI who realized, ooh, this is going to be a thing. We can use what we know and create this tool called Claude. Bolt ChatGPT 5 can vibe for you. It actually is not designed as well, so you'll notice the difference. If you ask for something to write you code, you get different code between all of these different groups, okay? Cursor, very popular. True or try, and then according to my postgraduate, soon-to-be brother-in-law who works at the Liverpool University, his claim is that lovable is the new deal. That is the new hot deal out there. He says, all the kids are doing it. That means all the grad students. And he said, they are all vibing to lovable. And this is all terminology we now have to understand. Okay, here's the concept of vibe coding. A developer uses a conversational style to generate code with a large language model. It's powered by these frameworks. So usually what you've done is you've built an entire coding environment where when you tell it to create something, it's really easy to have that code appear in whatever product you're creating. I did it slightly different because that's hard to set up. So it allows you to describe your ideas in a natural language, and then the LLM-centric framework builds it for you, right? Is this a good idea? I'm wondering, how many people here, if you're willing to raise your hand, think that building code this way is a good idea? Okay, fair answer. I think it's an interesting idea which has some potential. So, these are the people who build cloud. I told you that. There's a link to it if you want to read more. Here's what I did. My first vibe session, I logged into Claude.ai. It has a simple interface where you can type in what you want it to do or you can speak to it. So I spoke all of that to it. I told it everything I wanted to do, and the bottom line is I said, I want you to go to the website that has a JSON file that comes from a NASA satellite that tells you about solar flares, and I want you to read that JSON file, and I want you to create a page for me that updates every 5 minutes with whatever the latest amount of solar flare activity is, right? And it's something I actually need to do for a project I do. So I let it do it. Here's all the things I sent to it. I told it where the files are. I told it where I want it to write to. I said, you're gonna run this on Ubuntu 24.04 using PHP. You're reading this file that's JSON. Here are the exact fields. And then it took a moment and it came back with how to install it. It came back with the PHP script. It came back with the cron job that I was gonna need. Did a bunch of stuff. That was Vibe session 1. And then this is everything it gave me. You have to run the sudo command. You got to check for updates. You got to do all this stuff. It tells you everything you got to do. Then I said, I built a server after that. Realized, I better have a VM. So I got a VM going. I installed everything. I got it all set up, right? This is everything I did here. I had a cron job ready to go. I gave it all the stuff, PHP and Apache 2. I gave it a DNS name. So there's a herveyallen.com now where you can see all of this. And then I said, let's see what happens if I try to use what I was given. It didn't work, okay? So I did some changes. I thought about making the changes to make this thing work myself, because that's what I'm used to, and I was like, wait, that is not vibing. I need Claude to do it. So I asked Claude again, and I said, I have one change. I've now stuck it here, and the file system's a little different. Please regenerate. So it did, it went through. It updated the script. By the way, I have a website that you can all go to. You can look at all the script versions if you want on the site. You can see the results. It's all there. It made some changes, so I went and stuck those changes in. Did I get how to install? But I saw problems. Oops, something doesn't quite work. Not surprising. So I said, now, here's the big question. So I will speed this up because I want to get this one point home. How do you know how to fix this problem when something is vibing for you? Okay? So it said, this doesn't work. Can you fix it? I asked it to fix it for me. And it said, here's my third vibe. I want you to fix the problem that I saw. I gave it all the error messages that I saw. Came up with 3 solutions, okay? Option 1 would expose user data. Option 3 adds exposure to the web files. Ooh, how did I know that? It's because I know about Linux and I am a system admin and I have expertise. What happens in these projects when you're vibing and you're not that person? You pick one of those options and you now have exposed yourself to insecurities. So watch out. All right, so let's fix using Claude's Model 2, which I liked, and it's what people do generally. I followed it. I said, oh, cool, I got the update. Here it goes. I'm going to run it by hand. Did it work? That's what it looked like. I typed this command. Yes, it got a result. And it now has GOES 18 satellite current solar flare level, and it shows it to me on the website. Pretty cool. After a few minutes, oh, it kind of works. I'm not getting the updated files. What's going on? I asked Claude, hey Claude, what's going on? You gave me all this code, but yet it's not quite working. Claude said, oh, I see. Yeah, you can't write the file because of the system you're in. I'm wondering why it didn't tell me that the first time, but that's how this works. So it gave me a whole bunch of answers, and I said, wash, rinse, repeat. I am vibing now, right? I go through, and this is what you want to do. You need to create the files you need. So the alternate solution that was given to me, I had to pick the solution out with enough knowledge to know how to do it. So when I got all that done, do we need to do more about solving this problem? So the deal was it was not showing me data on the page repeatedly. I had to fix where a file was. I had to give it some more permissions, set stuff up. It all worked. Even vibing, even with AI, I didn't quite get everything I needed to really fix it. So I had to have some expertise. So do I need to do more? This is the big one for everybody who programs in any programming language on any system. When it creates whatever it's going to create for you and it works, do you need to do more? My argument is yes. You need to look for efficiency, security. What happens if it fails? Do you have anything for that? And make the results nicer if you want. So who does that? Is Claude AI going to do it? How about yourself or both? I don't know. I actually don't know. You just have to try. And knowing when it's done it right, you got to know enough to know when it's done it right. Okay, so after the 4th vibe, I've got all this stuff. I've got these 4 versions here. I've got a website over there on the right that you can go to, and it will show you everything. It will show you all 4 versions of this code. It will show you all the data that's being pulled down. It'll show you this presentation if you want. Take you to the website. The website is my name, herveyallen.com. That's all it is. And what does it all mean? Okay, what does this mean? The grand question posed by many, some people giving a response. Here's a response about artificial intelligence that I see all the time. It's actually by a university. And it tells you how it's going to enhance healthcare and build up economic growth and change mitigation and do all this cool stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. But my take is that these large language model systems get part of many questions right, but not all of it. It's part of the classic issue. How do you hire an expert when you don't have an expert in-house? How do you do that? If you need to hire an engineer, but you have no engineers, how do you know you hired a good one? Good companies get somebody who's an engineer to come in and be part of the process. So I'd argue to use these tools, you need to have somebody with expertise in what you're trying to solve to know whether it's done it right, okay? So for now, let's let artificial intelligence do the basic bits, and the humans need to step in at some point. So my total take is that this helped speed up my coding. It really helped. It made some of my opinion less than reasonable suggestions to get it running. And I've yet to review the code to decide whether or not I think it was safe and secure, right? So when can we stop reviewing what's been created? I'm not sure. OpenAI is about to spend $100 billion building their next large language model. And their belief is this is going to create the version of AI when maybe we can stop having to review what gets created to prove to ourselves that it's working. 100 billion just to build one model. They believe it's going to be worth it, right? And that's why they think they're going to win, and they might. We don't know yet. This is going to happen the next couple of years. So if you think AI has really changed things, prepare yourselves. The big, big changes are coming. Thank you very much. That's Anna Pizzo.